My name is Yetta Gurtner. I actually have a PhD in disaster management, but I'm an academic and the coordinator of the Centre of Disaster Studies here at James Cook University. So my primary role, what I do most on a day-to-day basis, is I lecture in a number of subjects, which disaster management is one, but also in human geography and social impact assessment. And I coordinate all the work placements for students across all the STEM activities, so mathematics, physics, marine biology. So those students who are interested in going out into industry, I actually coordinate their placements. I've worked in Cyclone Debbie and Larry and Yasi, going to community centres and talking to people about their experiences. And what we try and do in disaster management is learn from our lessons. What happened, what went really well, what went really badly, and what can we fix for next time? What can we do differently for next time? But when we think about disaster management, it's the heroes in capes and uniforms and that come in and rescue in the boats, which have a really important role, but that's only one very small part of the picture. And disaster management is understanding the bigger picture. Okay, well, if we intervene here, if we get more preparedness here, the response recovery is going to look different and will happen quicker and people will recover faster. Grew up in a very kind of moderate middle class sort of nuclear family where the mother was full-time mother at home. My father worked in Indigenous affairs, looking at issues around in local communities and that sort of stuff, and I became intrigued about communities and their capacity to help themselves. So I got into disaster management. My first kind of stint or introduction to it was in the Bali bombings. I was very familiar with Bali. I could speak a little bit of Indonesian. So I went back to Bali to look at the impact on what actually happened to the Indonesian community. That then extended after the 2004 tsunami. I went over to Thailand 4 days after the tsunami hit, and again worked with the non-government organisations and local communities to help them help themselves. It was an eye-opener. Basically, my introduction to it, I was sitting on a plane, a gentleman was sitting beside me with his brother, and he said, I'm from South Africa, my brother was on PP Island during the tsunami. I haven't heard from him since, so I've come over to look for him. So my first introduction is we actually went through the morgues, which we use the word morgues very generously. They were temples with thousands of bodies laid out in tarps. It was very difficult. I had never anticipated going over there, that's what I was going to do. But the job kind of took me there. We went from morgues and going through hospitals to DNA sampling, just running through the different processes, going to the emergency operations centres, interpreters, people with identification, listening to people's experiences and how they actually did that. Women, children, minorities tend to be more adversely affected because they don't have the same voice. Depending on the culture, depending on the society, women may be disenfranchised, or they're not allowed to speak, or they don't have the power, they don't have the networks, they don't have the contacts. If they don't have the employment opportunities, they don't have the economic same basis. So in that sense, when we look at the global level, women have been disproportionately affected. They suffer extensively from emotional distress, exhaustion, fatigue, financial stress, mental health issues. They're supporting children and husbands and other members of the family and communities through their own stress and trauma and disasters without actually seeking any help themselves. They're afraid to break down because they've got to keep the family together. They've got to keep the unit together. They've got to keep on keeping on because that's what their role in the family is. So we need to actually look at all the diversity of voices. Women, children, minority groups, ethnic diversity, language difficulties. We need to access, the deaf communities and those sorts of things to ensure that everybody has a voice in how recovery happens. To them, we need to actually purposely, proactively approach these communities, identify these communities and gain their trust. Trust is imperative to breaking the bias, and recognising that is where we actually start to break down some of those barriers. It's not so much about focusing on this structural mitigation, the built infrastructure. It's investing the money back in the community for those resilience projects, for helping them to empower themselves, to get out there. It's actually about actively engaging and not just short-term one-off. It has to be sustained over a long period of time. You have to consistently go back in the community about What now? What next? What's the future? It didn't hit any particular person. It didn't matter whether you're black, white, red, rich, poor, young, old. It impacted everyone. People are people, everyone was hurting badly. And that was it for me in disaster management. It's like, people need help and I have the capacity to help.